Poem for Romans 8:28. In all things, good, the threads of life, so frayed and torn, are woven still, though hearts may mourn. Each trial's weight, each shadow day, is not for waste but for the way. For in the hands of God divine, all sorrow takes a grand design. Though pain may linger, joy will bloom, for graves will break and leave no tomb. Oh, trust the one who shapes the plot, the scenes that hurt, the ones forgot. For what seems lost, he will renew. In all things, good is breaking through. Romans 8:28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Team, finding purpose in pain. Introduction, the challenge of believing in the good. Have you ever looked at a situation in your life and thought, there's no way this could turn out well? Maybe it was a breakup, a failed dream, or the loss of someone dear. Romans 8:28 can feel almost impossible to believe in those moments. In all things, we ask, even this thing? But this verse isn't a promise that everything will feel good. It's a promise that God can bring good, even from the most broken and painful parts of our lives. And that truth changes everything. Part 1. God's good is bigger than our circumstances. When Paul wrote these words, He wasn't sitting on a beach enjoying a carefree life. He was living a life marked by suffering, beaten, shipwrecked, and imprisoned for the gospel. And yet, he could boldly declare, "In all things God works for the good." Biblical context: Paul understood that good doesn't always mean comfort. It means God's purpose is being fulfilled, even when the process is painful. Look at Joseph's life. Sold into slavery by his brothers, falsely accused, and imprisoned. But at the end of his story, Joseph could say to those same brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." Genesis 50:20. Reflection for today: God is still writing your story. Just because you are in a painful chapter doesn't mean the book ends in tragedy. Part 2. God works through all things. Notice the verse doesn't say, "God causes all things." It says, "God works in all things." That means even when the enemy tries to destroy us, God is at work, redeeming, restoring, and weaving His purpose through every detail. Illustration: have you ever watched someone weave a tapestry? From the back, it looks like a mess of tangled threads. But when you turn it over, you see a beautiful design. That's how God works in our lives. From our limited perspective, it can feel like chaos. But God is creating something beautiful, even when we can't see it yet. Story: a friend of mine lost his job unexpectedly, and at first, it felt like his world was falling apart. But during that time, he discovered a passion for woodworking, a hobby that eventually turned into a thriving business. What felt like a loss was actually a redirection into something better. Part 3. Trusting God in the middle of the pain. The hardest part of Romans 8:28 is trusting God while we are still in the middle of the storm. It's one thing to look back and see how God worked things for good. It's another to trust Him when we can't yet see the outcome. Biblical example: think about Mary and Martha in John 11. When their brother Lazarus died, they couldn't understand why Jesus didn't come sooner. But Jesus had a bigger plan, a resurrection that would reveal His power and bring glory to God. Reflection for today: what if the delay, the hardship, or the loss you are experiencing is setting the stage for something greater than you could imagine? Humor: trusting God is a little like watching a mystery movie for the first time. You are sitting there yelling at the screen, "Why is the main character doing that?" But by the end of the movie, everything clicks, and you realize the writer knew what they were doing all along. Part 4. Called according to His purpose. This promise, God working all things for good, isn't random. It's for those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. Our love for Him. Loving God doesn't mean we never doubt or struggle. It means we choose to stay close to Him, even when life doesn't make sense. His purpose for us, God's ultimate purpose, is to conform us to the image of Christ. Romans 8:29. Sometimes that shaping process is painful, but it's always for our good. Illustration: have you ever seen a sculptor at work? They take a rough block of stone and chip away everything that doesn't belong until the masterpiece is revealed. That's what God is doing in our lives, shaping us into who He created us to be. Application: how do we live this out? Bring your pain to God. Don't try to handle it on your own. Lay it at His feet and ask Him to work in it. Look for His hand. Even in the hardest seasons, there are glimpses of His goodness, an encouraging word, an unexpected blessing, a moment of peace. Share your story. Your testimony of how God worked in your pain could be the encouragement someone else needs. Closing story: beauty from ashes. I once heard the story of a woman who went through a devastating divorce. At first, she thought her life was over, but in the years that followed, She found healing through her church community, discovered a deeper relationship with God, and eventually started a ministry for women going through similar struggles. She said, "I would never wish that pain on anyone, but I wouldn't trade what God has done in my life for anything." Closing challenge. What in your life feels impossible right now? What part of your story are you struggling to trust God with? This week, take a step of faith and say, "Lord, I don't understand this, but I trust that you are working for my good." Final encouragement. God is not finished with your story. He's weaving every thread, even the painful ones, into a masterpiece that reflects His love and glory. Hold on and watch how He turns it all for good.